This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority. Welcome, everybody, to the Haulin Assets podcast, episode number 174. Today, we are talking about how truckers make money. Okay, we're going to do a guide today to driver compensation. This should be a hot topic for anybody who's going beyond the owner-operator sphere and beginning to add trucks.
Even the owner-operator sphere. We're going to talk a little bit about that, too.
That's a good point.
Not just beyond the owner-operator sphere, but actually owner-operator stuff, too.
You know, if you own your own company, Chris, you should be so... Oh, by the way, I'm Craig. Over there, he's Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Hey.
How you doing?
Chris, you should be so proud of me. I have read 2 business books since you and I last met, centering around accounting and taxing and all.
What a nerd!
Tell me about it. I have not yet built a spreadsheet about them, but I'm dipping my toes into your world a little bit. So anyway, but no, that's a big focus of one of these books is if you're a business owner, you are paying yourself a market-based wage. Yeah. End of story.
Absolutely.
So anyway, we'll talk about all that stuff. But of course, we have a few things to get to before we talk our main topic. I want to remind everybody of haulinassets.com where you can get, haulinassetsllc.com where you can get full show notes. You can get the documentation, especially for the financials episodes. I'd say it's vital there and important everywhere else. To go check out haulinassetsllc.com for all that info. Also, motorcarrierhq.com. Oh, Chris, you've got a blanket on the back of that couch. Pull it up a little higher. Oh, people on YouTube can see this.
Look at that logo. It's beautiful.
Gorgeous logo. Motorcarrierhq.com. You can get merch as well as sorry to say, Chris, the more important things like the tools, tips, and people to help you make that leap from employee driver to owner operator and possibly beyond.
Absolutely.
So, also, Chris, before we do main topic stuff, as always, I'm going to ask you what's going on. And you gave me a little teaser and you said something along the lines of, oh man, I love being a business owner, especially of a trucking company where nothing interesting or exciting ever happens. And life is ever
just
non-stressful.
Calm and normal. Yep. And just never a dull moment. Never a dull moment.
Okay.
Apparently, Tuesdays that we record the podcast episode are not great days for Haulin Assets.
So today, something happened today?
Yeah.
Okay, so give me the lowdown.
This morning, I get a call from one of our drivers, and he's all like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make our delivery. Somebody just sideswiped the truck, and my whole hood is messed up, and so on and so forth. So to make a long story short, you know how he's parked, our driver parked in the very end stall in a rest area.
Okay.
And you know how rest areas have a very specific traffic pattern, right?
They've got a route. Yeah.
They've got a route. And this one, like many of them, the parking's diagonal. You come down one side of the parking way, pull into a stall, and go out the other side.
Right.
Right? Well, this knucklehead...
Excellent.
I had to change I was going to say something else, keeping it family friendly here.
For all the families in the trucks listening to us.
Drives all the way to the very end. Our driver's at the end, and for some reason must have decided he wanted to go all the way back or something. So instead of exiting like a normal human being would, the guy decides to make a left turn, which would have gotten him going the opposite direction of traffic. And this is a really long, he would have had to have gone like several hundred yards going against what would have been traffic. And it's not like there's typically enough room that you probably could have passed 2 trucks, but it would have been tight. So anyway, the guy decides to do that and cuts the corner
just
way too tight.
Mangles a front end.
Yeah, and it wasn't even close. I think he hit our truck like midway through his flipping trailer. It's not like he just tagged it with the back end. It's like the dude wasn't even paying any kind of attention and just obliterates.
Have you
our truck.
heard who it is? Is it some like really green behind the gills, brand new driver or something?
Good question. I don't know. He was driving a Ryder truck, so the truck was a rental, and I guess is a flatbed trailer with a those the trailers that have a you can put a forklift on the back of it. It had the forklift from Home Depot on it, so it may have been like a Home Depot rental too.
Yeah,
like
some rental knucklehead. Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, lovely. So to make to make our short story that was supposed to be long that I shortened, that's now long again.
This phrase is just I
should stop
reflex
saying it.
for
Yeah,
you.
it is a reflex for me. I should never say that again. You should like shock me or something.
That's right.
We'll put a shock collar on my leg. Next time I say it, you can shock me. Anyway, where was I going with that?
Yeah, so he mangled the front end.
Myself.
He's halfway along the flatbed. It was not even close. So was there engine damage?
No engine damage, luckily. No spillage of liquids. I think our truck is going to be drivable. He actually got to his delivery location a day early and had literally been stopped for like 10 or 20 minutes when this happened. And so he hasn't driven it yet, but it bent some stuff. It mangled the hood pretty good. It ripped like the front grill off, but it didn't damage the headlights. The lights still work. No spillage of liquid. So we think it's going to be drivable. But he had to tear some other stuff all the way off, get rid of all those hanging parts. And so I'll have to send a pretty good picture on Facebook or something on social media so you can see it. It's it looks ugly, but I think everything will still work. Okay. The highway patrolman that did the accident investigation said, you're okay. I wouldn't give you a citation if you were driving down down the road, especially if you explained to me, hey, this just happened, trying to get home, get it fixed. So I think we're going to be okay there.
Okay. Well, that's a lot that's been going on for you. And, it reminds me of, Chris, I'm a very good driver. I would be a great candidate to join your fleet because I think I told you it was not until 2 years ago that I got my first ticket. First time I'd ever been pulled over, et cetera. No accidents, no nothing. And you know why? Because while I am a very good driver, I never, ever, ever assume that the next guy is. You just never know what you're going to run into out there. You don't. That defensive driving thing is good, but it's kind of hard to practice defensive driving when you're parked. Although maybe he could have parked in a different spot or that's actually it's not a bad best practice. Obviously nobody should be hitting you if you're correctly parked in any stall in a lot like that, but maybe it's best practice. Hey, leave those end stalls for somebody else anytime it's possible. Probably. Yeah. Well, Chris, you want to talk about driver pay? Let's talk about it. Get into that stuff. Yeah. So, how do you want to start in on this? Do you want to start with owner operators? Let's start with owner operators, and then we go into fleet building. I think that's a great idea. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but I really love the term owner operator. I don't think there is a better, more descriptive title for something out there than owner operator, because you're both a business owner and you're operating your vehicle. So you have both sides of that, and your pay should reflect that. Part of your pay should be what you would get paid as an owner, and part of your pay should be what you get paid as a driver. Right. And there's some tax implications and some tax things that you have to do to make this work. So I'm not going to dive into that super deep. We've got some other episodes where we go into this in a little bit more detail. But typically, for most people, your best organization for your business is going to be taxed as an S corp. Right, an LLC taxed as an S corp. Yeah, you can be an Inc. or an LLC, but either way, you're going to pick to be taxed as an S corp. That's a form you have to file with the IRS. You have to physically do something to be taxed as an S corp, but then that gives you some advantages of being able to kind of separate those two forms of income, right? So you've got some income that you get paid as a driver or an employee of the business, and you get some income that you get
as an owner of the business, and how those are taxed are different.
Now, when you say two different types of income, I assume that you're talking about you pay yourself a wage as a driver. And then are you talking about paying yourself a wage as an owner, or are you talking about taking money out of the business, getting those dispensations or whatever we want
distributions?
to call them?
Profit distribution. So that's really, you're not really paying yourself a wage as an owner.
What did I say? Dispensations?
You were way off. Yeah.
I know. Why did I say? Okay.
Maybe
Anyway.
you should talk a little bit less this episode than normal.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Anyway. All right. So back up. You're saying wages or distributions as your owner pay?
Yeah. Not a wage is the owner pay. Your what you would get for payment as an owner is distributions.
Right.
So your wage would be what you get as an employee of the business. Because when you're an owner operator, and really in most businesses, like even in my businesses, I pay myself as an employee for the day-to-day stuff that I do in the business. But then when the business is profitable, I will get distributions, and that's another form of income that I will get. The pay, the wage that I get is typically going to be more consistent. Mm-hmm. Every month or every 2 weeks or every week, whatever your pay cycle is, I get this much as the employee. And then in my situation, the way I like to do it is every quarter, any profits that I feel like can be distributed, get distributed, and I get that income as an owner.
And there's you've talked all the time about not going out and buying that sweet pickup truck, right? It's tempting to say, oh, I made 10 grand in profit this quarter. I'm just going to take that 10 grand out and go on a sweet vacation and this is something you want to talk to your accountant about and all that. There's so many things waiting in line to get paid before you do as an owner, including yourself as a driver. So don't get too excited. You gotta be pretty profitable consistently before you're going to start seeing those distributions.
And usually it's best to not take those the first year or two that you're in business. You want to be able to, even if your business is profitable in that first year or two, you typically want to have that money set aside. And you want to kind of do an analysis on your business and say, hey, and depending on your risk tolerance and a bunch of other factors, you may say, hey, just to use round numbers, my expenses every year are $100,000. I want to have 6 months worth of expenses set aside. And once you've got that set aside, then any money above and beyond that you make in profits, that's where you want to maybe start distributing that. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't necessarily distribute every dollar that you make in profit, but once you get up to you've got a slush fund set aside, you've got your savings, everything's good there, then you can start distributing. At that point, maybe even all of your profits, or maybe you distribute part of it and you keep part of it in the business to grow the business or for something else.
Okay, so that's the owner side of it, and that's going to be the idea, at least, behind owner pay and distributions is going to be pretty consistent no matter what the size of your company is, whether you're solo or running a fleet. The principle will remain the same. But let's back up and talk driver pay and the idea behind paying yourself as the driver of the truck. I mentioned at the beginning of the episode the idea of a market-based wage. It's tempting for reasons that people can probably think of. It's tempting to say, hey, I'm just going to pay myself 15 grand a year for being a driver and put the rest into the business or whatever. There are temptations that way. It's not a great idea, and maybe we can get into why. But what I want to ask you is, what does it mean to have a market-based wage? And when you're just starting out, how do you determine that? How do you, Chris, determine what a market-based wage is?
That's a really good question. And typically, I think the safest way to do this, as a trucking company and as an owner-operator or driver, the best way to do that is just to say, hey, in my last job, I got paid XYZ. Now that I own my own business, my driver pay is going to be that same exact amount that I was getting paid before. If you do that, you're going to be safe. You're not ever going to get any trouble with the IRS because there's a track record there that is a reasonable wage. You're not underpaying yourself, which that's where people get into problems, is they try to underpay themselves so they can get higher profits. They get taxed less typically. And, if you do that, the IRS can come back and slap your hand and fine you and do all kinds of crazy things.
And an audit is no fun for anybody. The IRS snaps those rubber gloves, and you should be scared.
Yep.
So, you want to stay away from those red flags, right?
For sure.
Okay, where else do you want to go with the idea of driver pay? What principles do we need to keep in mind as we think about this?
Typically, drivers are paid two different ways, and it really depends on what kind of operation you run typically. Most drivers are going to be paid if they are a local driver, typically paid by the hour. If you're an over-road driver, you're typically paid by the mile. So those are the two that we're going to talk about today, hourly pay versus mileage-based pay.
Okay. So let's start then with hourly pay. Or sorry, no, let's start with hourly pay, because that's, for our audience, I think, going to be the less common route. We talk a lot with over-the-road drivers, but I know that we have some local folks listening to us as well. So let's start there and say hourly pay. That one's pretty straightforward, right? We're talking timestamps, right? Clock in, clock out.
Yeah, absolutely. Hourly pay is typically very straightforward. Your driver either arrives in the yard, starts the time clock, getting paid, does pre-trip, gets in the truck, does the thing, still getting paid by the hour, and gets paid until the truck shuts down and the driver's going home. That's typically as simple as that. Where things get more complicated is in that over-the-road scenario where you're getting paid by the mile. And it doesn't necessarily have to get more complicated. There are very straightforward ways of doing mileage-based pay, but then there are ways to make it very, very complicated. So let's talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that typically it comes into question when you talk about mileage-based pay is, do you pay the driver for every mile they drive, or do you pay the driver for just loaded miles?
So you're talking about deadhead. Then.
Yeah. So yes, correct. So do you pay drivers for deadhead or not? In our situation, we pay our drivers deadhead.
Does that, for you guys, does that lower what you're willing to pay per mile? If you're paying for deadhead, are you paying a few cents less or whatever per mile to your drivers?
Yeah, ultimately, if we were going to pay them just on the mileage pay or the loaded miles, we'd probably increase that. But this is one of the points that I'm going to kind of try to make as we talk a little bit about the different ways that you can pay by the mile. Drivers typically don't like ambiguity in pay. They don't like things that can be misunderstood or misrepresented. And I think that's one of the things with deadhead miles is
what counts.
Yeah, what counts, what doesn't. It gets complicated. They don't know what they're going to get paid. They start to get upset that they're driving all these miles. Maybe your deadhead gets higher than it normally would, and
it affects the way you're sending them out, how you're what loads you're taking, how far you're picking up.
Well, and it creates a sense of, am I being treated fairly? Like there's a lot of different things that a driver that can cause problems, and I really feel like deadhead miles is one of those.
Okay.
It creates discontent. It has the potential to create discontent.
And that's not just drivers, that's any employee. It's a little bit like prenuptial agreements or contracts in a lot of forms, or just the concept of tall fences make for good neighbors, right? The idea that what feels like an onerous over communication and, do we really have to contract this? Can't we just shake hands? No, you can't just shake hands, because if everything's written down and it's all contractual, then you get rid of that ambiguity, you get rid of the uncertainty for your drivers and increase their satisfaction because they knew going in what they were going to get out on the other end.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And pay is just one of those things you don't want to mess with. You don't want to It's one of the quickest things to upset people, to create, unhappy employees.
Yeah.
And so you want to try to be as transparent as possible when it comes to pay.
So when it comes to miles, we're really sticking to the old acronym, right? KISS. Keep it simple, stupid, right? So whatever miles they drove, that's what you're paying for. Great. But do you have any other caveats or add-ons, bonuses? A lot of employees at different levels in companies do or don't operate on bonuses. What about drivers?
Drivers, a lot of the times you'll see this in trucking companies. And if you remember right, when we first started Haulin Assets, our first driver, Mike, we tried to do an incentive pay program.
Shout out, Mike.
And we actually did, and it worked well with Mike. But when we tried to hire our third driver and we started, talking about that, we realized, and this actually came from a discussion with Mike. Mike kind of said, well, here's maybe why you're having a hard time finding a driver, even though you're trying to pay a wage that's above market value, is because we were creating ambiguity in the business in the bonus program. I can't remember exactly how we had it, but a lot of the times, we'll just talk in generalities with trucking companies. A lot of the times you'll see them pay a bonus for safety. If they didn't have any safety violations, then you get an extra cent a mile. Or if you were on time all the time, you get an extra so much per mile. If you drive so many miles, if you're so fuel efficient, you get all these bonuses or things that can affect their pay. And, that's kind of how the incentive program typically works on a mileage-based program, but then it creates all this ambiguity. So a driver doesn't know, okay, am I going to get paid 60 cents a mile or am I going to get paid 70 cents a mile? Yeah. What am I actually going to get? And, part of the problem with this too is some of that stuff's out of their control, like how many miles they get.
Or as we've talked about accidents for a few podcasts in a row, what's going to count? Oh, crap, this guy just sideswiped me in a parking lot while I was parked. Is that going to hit my pay? So, nobody likes that ambiguity. And people, myself, and I don't know about yourself, Chris. You're a very disciplined person. But in general, human beings are not great at planning on bonuses.
Yeah.
Right? We think of the bonus as a thing that's going to happen if I'm a good employee.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like, as you say, maybe some of that is out of your control. I've worked for companies where I could earn a bonus, and I knew that someone upstream of my job was responsible for a lot of what was going to happen with what I was doing. And boy, is that frustrating. Yep. And so you handled the dispatching for Haulin Assets for a long time, and you can imagine if somebody's bonus depended on their number of miles driven, and then you hand them a load that's underwhelming mileage-wise, they're going to go, what gives? Grumble, grumble, grumble. How dare you? This isn't helping. So would you say that is a good general statement? Avoid bonus structures and just give a good base wage? Or is this one of those like, hey, this is 90% of companies 90% of the time, but there are exceptions to this rule? I
really feel torn and conflicted in this because as a general rule of thumb, I love bonus programs and incentive-based pay. The harder you work, the more you're going to get paid. The better job you do, the more you're going to get paid. A perfect example of that is sales. You get paid a commission. The more you sell, the more you get paid. I love that kind of thing. But I've found with drivers, it doesn't really work. One, because there's the ambiguity. Two, because there's just so much out of their control. Like if you've got an incentive that's based on the number of miles a driver drives in a week, well, they may run into really bad weather. I-80 may get shut down. They may have an accident. That's not their fault. There's a myriad of things that can happen that can reduce the number of miles they get, which then reduces their pay. And so I think it just, in my experience, it's worked better if you hire the right drivers that are already, for the most part, safety-minded and work hard and do all these things, and then just give them a good, fair, flat wage that is going to be predictable for them.
Okay, good. So, all right, you've decided as the owner of the company, how do I put this? We've moved beyond owner operator to now you got to hire people and you need to figure out what to pay them. When you were an owner operator, it was pretty easy, and you've talked about this a lot in the past, where you take your salary at your last employee job, and that's what you pay yourself as a driver of your own company now. Great, easy peasy. But what if you're hiring a driver? You've got 3 slots to fill, 5, 10 slots to fill. How do you know what is the going market rate? Because maybe it's been a little while since you were an employee driver and you don't have a great sense of where the rate is at.
That's a good question. And that's, even if it hasn't been that long, like post-COVID, the driver wages changed really quickly, and that can happen. And so you really want to figure out what kind of market rate is. So whether you're hiring drivers and pay them hourly, or you're hiring drivers and paying them by the mile, I feel like the best thing to do is to just do some good old-fashioned market research. So pretend like you're the same kind of driver that you're trying to hire, and go look at some of your competitors, specifically, ideally in your area where you're trying to hire from, and see what they're paying. I would recommend you get at least 5 and figure out what they're paying, and try to match your compensation plan to something similar to what they're doing. So again, you take those 5, you average them out, and you have to ask yourself, okay, do I want to be paying below average wage, or above average wage? And there's kind of pros and cons to each one of those.
Well, let's talk about those pros and cons in just a second, but I'm actually going to back up for a moment. You're talking about doing market research, secret shopping some of your competitors, which everybody does it. It's fine. And so you're doing your research that way. Well, that sounds a lot more difficult and more complicated than going to Glassdoor.com or Salary.com and just looking up what they say. What about those? Are they okay as resources? Is it should you disregard internet information like that and just try to find firsthand stuff?
I would try to find typically firsthand stuff, because a lot of the times those places kind of take a national average, and wages can vary quite a bit from one area to another. I think it's best to just do some old-fashioned market research. Typically in an hour or two, you can get a really good handle on what that wage is.
Okay. All right. So with that in mind, then, what do you see as the pros and cons of below, above, or at average for driver pay?
So let's start with below.
There's some pretty obvious cons there.
Yeah, you're typically not going to get the best quality drivers, right? You're either going to get people that are inexperienced, or people that for one reason or another are not attractive as drivers to other companies. Maybe they've had accidents, or they're just difficult to deal with. They go from one company to another, to another, to another, to another. Those are usually the ones that will accept a below average wage. So that's really the con. I personally would not even touch that. Like, I wouldn't even mess with it. The advantage is that I think short term on your P&L, you might get a little bit of a bump, but I don't think it's worth the headache, the potential risk to your reputation as a company. There's a whole bunch of reasons I feel like that's just a bad idea.
Okay. Now let's talk about above average wages, and then maybe we can come back to average, or maybe it'll just kind of reveal itself as we go. Paying someone above market wages, again, some pretty obvious cons. Your P&L hurts a little bit. If your trucking company is supposed to spend X% of its revenue on employee pay, and you're doing 1.3x that, because you're paying above wages, obviously that's cutting into your profit as an owner. That sucks. You built this company. Okay, so that sucks, but your drivers are happy, right? Yeah. Your drivers are going to stick with you forever. They would never think about leaving the company. They would never think about another situation. Right, Chris? Right?
Mostly right, yeah. That's really turnover is one of the big reasons to pay above average, and it's not gonna eliminate your driver turnover, but it will greatly reduce it. And so I would make the argument, I'm never gonna typically pay 1.3 times the average salary, but in reality, even if you're paying just 2 or 3 cents more a mile than kind of what would be average, or maybe it's a dollar more an hour than what would be considered average, you're still going to be able to attract good talent, safe drivers, the kind of people that you really want driving for you, and they're going to stick around longer. So you're going to have less time with the truck sitting empty. You're going to have less expense on hiring, less headache with drivers. I think there's a whole bunch of reason to pay above a market wage. That's what we try to do.
So, but if I hear you correctly, when you say above a market wage, you're saying, hey, I'm going to find that average as best I can and try to bump it up a little bit within reason. But what you're not going to do is go nuts thinking that if I go 1.3x or whatever, if I do that, then I'll be the best boss ever. Everybody's going to love me. That's just not quite
until
how
you
it's
go out
work.
of business because you can't turn a profit.
Well, and exactly. I mean, people who have been listening to this show for a long time know that the last 2 years for Haulin Assets has been rough.
Tough. Yeah.
Right. And that's with a slightly above average pay rate. Well, if you had been wildly above average, we probably wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation right now.
Yeah.
Because driver pay is... Chris, where do you put it? Fixed or variable expense? Because it is per mile, but it's pretty predictable as a percentage of your company's profits.
It is. It's definitely, I would consider it overall a variable expense. But it is something that, your trucks for the most part are going to be moving and you're going to be paying that wage. So,
but I guess my point is, like, if there's a downturn in the economy, the market is just not supporting your business anymore. It's going to be easier to weather that storm if your payroll expenses are not wildly out of whack with the rest of the market.
Yep. Yeah. And, that we've talked a lot about this too, that margins in the trucking industry are super tight. And so there's just not the ability to pay outrageous wages or, much higher than average market wage. There's just not a whole lot of room to do that.
By the way, Outrageous Wages sounds like a great album title for a metal band or something.
You write a song and I'll listen to
Wages.
It. Nice.
All right, Chris, any other parts of this topic that you want to hit? Anything that we missed so far?
I think that covers it.
Okay. So I would say if anybody has more questions, we all think that our situation is super unique, and it is oftentimes. So if you have any specific questions about how this applies to you, I'd love to hear them. Hit us up on Facebook. Go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com. You can actually comment on each episode there. So we'd love to hear questions because this is a very, very important topic. It's one that we may have even done an episode on this before, but if we have, then there will be a third and a fourth down the road because it's a
good thing to revisit every once in a while for sure.
Yeah. All right, Chris, I'll just remind everybody once again, HaulinAssetsLLC.com, MotorCarrierHQ.com, and don't forget, if you've gotten to this point in this episode, then you're hungry for knowledge, and you should go to HaulinAssetsAcademy.com for the courses that you can take as a kind of self-directed education in how to make that leap into business ownership. Chris, thanks for coming by again.
Good to see you.
We will talk to everybody in a couple weeks.
See you then.